We're rolling live again. Bitcoin Liberty Live, remote. I'm on the coast in Oregon this weekend.
Yeah,
We're
Fritz is
hanging out
a
near
Dutch
yachts.
American. He just travels all around all the time.
Yeah. Well, you were traveling a couple weeks ago, seeing family. I'm
Yeah.
seeing family.
Oh, are you? You got family on the coast? I didn't know that.
Well, we just met up out here. There's
Oh,
some friends that live out here, and my mom organizes this thing, so we get together. But anyway, cousins and sisters and uncles and stuff, they're out here. So
sounds
anyway,
epic.
they're camping, and it's raining.
Oh,
And
dude.
my
Yeah.
wife and I see in the past I'd be like, I can camp. I'm actually good for whatever. I mean, I grew up camping in the rain and all that. After I got married, my wife is like, they make Airbnbs and we're literally walking distance from them on the beach in like an actual house.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's like my joke too, man. I go, my idea of roughing it these days is like when the hotel doesn't have cable, So it's I, I mean, I don't mind camping. I like being out in nature and stuff like that. I think it can be. I think it's relaxing on some level. But
yeah.
when there's like weather, like I went winter camping out in not Death Valley, but sort of close to Death Valley, Joshua Tree, right? And oh my God, that was just awful. Like it was fun to sit around the campfire and stuff, but like trying to sleep when it's like, you know, 0 degrees, and it was just the whole thing was like
Sleep is
miserable.
always the hardest thing. Even when you got
Yeah,
good, comfortable setup, it's really not the same. And
yeah,
it just,
exactly.
you feel tired during the day, and it is what it is.
Yeah,
Um, Maybe you can see it. Oh, there it is. Ocean.
yeah.
Um,
The big blue Pacific.
I can also just get somewhere, okay, you bring food and water and basics, but I can sit and hang out and tend to fire and maybe play around with woodcraft, but I don't need to be doing anything or be planning or working on stuff. I can hang out at the camp and just chill.
Yeah,
And my mom and my family, it was often this like, look busy, stay busy. What are we doing? We need to go on a hike. Let's see that thing up there. We got to get to the top of it. And it's just like,
right.
why?
Yeah,
Can
we're
we
out here
just
to
hang out?
relax. Yeah, like why do I have to go to work to be in nature? Yeah,
And I don't mind doing that, but it's kind of like I need a day or two to feel like, okay, I'm bored enough to go on a hike now.
right. Yeah,
um,
yeah. I just want to chill
Sometimes,
out and decompress, But people
yeah,
have trouble relaxing, man. They just have to be doing stuff. I used to hate traveling. Like I'd go to Europe with my friends, and they would just be like, "We gotta go here, we gotta go here." I'm just like, "Can't we just like chill out and enjoy where we are?"
take it
Nope,
in.
nope, none of that. We're gonna go to this museum and this thing and this cultural site and this thing and this. I mean, I guess it's okay to do tourist stuff, but God, man, I just given the choice between doing tourist stuff or just kind of strolling around the city and stopping in a cafe and just kind of like living life in a different space for a little while, I think the latter is preferable.
Yeah,
But you were saying offline you had started reading the end of my the book. What'd you
yeah.
think?
Free writing, theories on free writing. I hadn't heard about that before. I mean, I know the concept, but it was interesting to. I followed a link to one of your um, references, and
Mm.
yeah, the whole free writing thing. It's like that's like the best that a lot of people hope they can get right now. Is like,
Yeah,
hey,
the whole
own an
world is free
Airbnb
riding.
and rent it out. That's kind of a dream.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our whole economy is predicated on free riding now. I mean, the entire United States economy is built on free riding, basically. So, uh, I mean, just because of our position as the world superpower, global dollar folks, we get to like export all our costs and all our inflation and everything to everybody else, and so we've had a pretty good run of things because of our position. But I think those days are starting to wind down pretty quickly here, so we'll see where that leads.
Yeah, and I go through a thing where I feel like at one level the transition is so huge. So at one level I feel like, wow, numbers so big, hard to get your mind around exponentials.
Yeah.
and it's going to be so huge, so big, so crazy, and you sort of think it could happen any time where it just God candles. We're like, oh shit, everything's changing, and we're like, people, it hits them like a fire hose. And other times, I feel like it'll be like it is now, crab walks with jumps and little descents, and then jumps for 50 years.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think there is like zero. I mean, any chance of that latter scenario unfolding, I think, are fleetingly close to zero. Yeah, there's just they have to print, man, and like I think a bunch of people recently have pointed out, like if you go look at Weimar Germany, like Peter St. Onge pointed it out in one of his little clips. He said, the thing that it wasn't one of his clips, it was one of his long form podcasts. He said, back in Weimar Germany, when the hyperinflation started, people weren't like bitching about the inflation. They were excited about all their stock market gains, right? Like they're all like, "Oh my God, look at the stocks! Oh, we're all rich, yay!" It wasn't until the reality where the stock market gains came from that they got kicked in the teeth. Right now, our political apparatus and our media apparatus are so adept at lying that like the propaganda is so thorough and so baked in. Like people don't even realize how screwed they are. Like right now, our true unemployment rate is probably 20%. You can just look around and see the streets of every major city are just cluttered with tents and homeless people and feces and needles and all sorts of nasty stuff. And they want to blame it on the liberals, but I just go, it's just the economy, man. It's the economy, stupid. To quote the old James Carville thing. But like it's so obscured that people are literally detached from the reality of their own existence. Like people that are making the average wage in America right now, like the median income is like 70,000 a year or something like that. In 1990 terms, that's the equivalent of like $10 an hour, and people are still sort of clipping along like, well, I make 70,000, so things should be good.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You're getting hosed, man. Like if you're not making six figures plus, you're falling behind fast, and it's going to be real hard for people to keep up, and especially people that don't have Bitcoin. So I think the likelihood of a printer not coming on and we not seeing God candles is close to zero. Like I just don't think that's going to happen. But what we can buy with those God candles, I think, is going to plummet um, right
One thought
alongside.
I had in thinking about, when I was wrapping up the end of your book and thinking about the great details on the great realignment, just how this could play out, and how, you know as they recognize Bitcoin, that big power players are obviously going to start using it to their advantage or doing what they can. And when I think of the Cantillon effect, where money printing at the top trickles down, and if, say, Bitcoin becomes an outlet, not even a hedge, but something like, oh, there's a power play here. We want to get in on it, own more of it, but do it kind of quietly, maybe, or whatever. But get in on it. Say, what if money printing starts to happen, and as the money trickles down, and the players at the top have more of that fresh cut money to, say, buy Bitcoin? Um, on one hand, good for Bitcoin, good for the system. It's kind of a one way ticket. On the other hand, they get an advantage of getting in while the rest of us are like trying to stay humble and stack sats. You know what I mean?
I don't know if I'm following what you're saying. Maybe you can expand on it a little bit.
If you could print money and then exchange that for Bitcoin,
Correct.
and then those at the top, as they do, have that advantage. When you think of the Cantillon, or people call it the Cantillon effect, the Cantillon effect,
Yeah.
where the closer you are to that money, the better advantaged you are to, um, lending it downward.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's
when
it's
you're
like
working for a salary, you're just getting what you get,
right.
and your interest rates are, high singles, double digits.
Well, I guess I mean I understand what the Cantillon effect is. What I'm not quite clear on is like what the
Well, I guess would people print money to buy Bitcoin? Banks or whatever.
Well, they already are, right? So, I mean, we're all collectively having printed money that's buying Bitcoin, like all of us, including us, like the plebs. It's just, as a result of the Cantillon effect, our purchasing power with those dollars is severely diluted compared to the people at the top. But the the thing I guess I'm struggling with is I don't understand like what negative externality that would manifest. Like if because like that's one of the Michael Saylor things. Like the first country that figures out they can print money and buy Bitcoin is going to win, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is partly attributable to like a resource capture mindset that says, well, we have to hoard as much of this as possible. But I don't know if the way Bitcoin property rights are enforced, I don't think lends itself ultimately. Maybe in the short term, people would want to like super hoard things and be like a Michael Saylor that has 215,000 Bitcoin or whatever. But I think in probably 10 years' time, it's going to seem like a pretty ludicrous concept to be trying to hoard or capture that much property because it won't make any sense because no one can steal it. So what's the point in hoarding all of it? Like you hoard things that you can either steal and then defend, right? But if you can't steal it and you don't need to defend it, then what's the point in hoarding it? Beyond a certain threshold, you go, well, I got more property than I could ever use. What's the point in having this, right?
Yeah. Or could you see a scenario where they want to tilt the table? I mean, the numbers would have to be so big, but like say, um, what holdings they have, they sell to depress a price for buddies to get some, and then okay, let's print some money and buy a bunch and send the number up. Um, I'm sure these types of games happen already in other
Well,
in
I mean,
other.
that's pretty much the entire Binance business model, right? So
Yeah.
it's, yeah. But I mean, in terms of like what that does, like I don't think that has any material impact on what happens with Bitcoin, right? Like the big shift for me is like it's a property right that's not a sovereign issued property right. It's a God given property right, like a truly God given property right, or at least a network granted property right. So
Yeah. And honestly, no matter what you do, you play games or you want to control it or whatever, all those games really just seem to help Bitcoin because it just sort of gets entangled more and more in the system. You know what I mean?
well that's the whole point is like regardless of how people acquire their Bitcoin, like the provided people are still using some sort of fiat medium of exchange, um, then it sort of like I don't think fiat is going to go away, right? So if fiat's not going away, it kind of doesn't matter what is happening with the fiat price, right? Like the fiat price increasing is the thing that's going to allow some of these monetary systems to reset to a more healthy, sustainable level, you know. But that's a function of people using fiat to buy it. So like the swelling of the property value that is Bitcoin in fiat denominated terms is going to be driven by fiat debasement 100%. Like there is no other thing that's going to drive Bitcoin price, right? If they're not debasing fiat, if they suddenly tomorrow made it like so it's the whole entire world is on a global sound money standard, then Bitcoin becomes irrelevant, right? You just don't need it anymore. So but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think anybody is geared up towards like, hey, let's stop inflating currency because the system they built, that's a few hundred trillion in debt right now, they can't not print. So it, it doesn't matter. If you hold some Bitcoin, it's going to do great for you. But every company, every business, every legislature, whatever that adopts Bitcoin, their balance sheet gets fixed and everyone else's doesn't. So sooner or later, everyone else has to go, well, if we want to fix our balance sheet too, it's either adapt or die. And the only adaptation that you can make is Bitcoin. So it doesn't matter what fiat games they play. It doesn't matter, unless they can compromise the network, the rest of it's just, you know, the dying embers of a failed ideology, which is fiat currency. So
Yeah, and even as I'd say, Federal Reserve and others are going to do their best to navigate. If you can call it a soft landing, I don't know that that's maybe possible, but just prolonging their game, it just gives more an opportunity for Bitcoin to steadily work its magic and creep its way through and through and through. So, in one sense, you could maybe try to think you're going to stop Bitcoin if you just pulled the plug and had it all crash and started over hard and did something different. But even then, I don't know that it would, you know, replace a money system so easily. But I do see what they do. Where okay, we got problems. Oh, we got more problems. Oh, we got more problems, and we just kick the can between interest rates and money printing, and it just sort of tries to slow down the inevitable.
Mm.
But this time is good. The time is to the advantage of getting, say Bitcoin adopted and in um, in the industries, in the established,
Well, I mean, Bitcoin goes everywhere, right? Like, I think the point of the in the final part of that book is not so much that like Bitcoin's going to transplant the monetary system, but more that it sort of heals and allows for that sort of gradual transition to potentially a new sound monetary standard. But in the short term, what I think it does is it allows the fiat rails to sort of function closer to what the intent was for the fiat rails. Like I know the Bitcoin bubble says it's all about control and they want to dominate the world and make you eat bugs and all this kind of stuff. I think those are all symptoms of the the failure of rubber band money, right? The failure of elastic currency. But solid currency has its drawbacks as well, and there's thousands of years of people tinkering with both and trying to figure out some way to make it work. And so I think some sort of hybrid of that where you have an asset that is fixed and then you have a currency that may be elastic. I think that's sort of where you end up in a kind of sweet spot where you can get the growth, you can get the innovation, you can get the sustainability of human flourishing, and you can also account for the inevitable problems that come from elastic money, right? Because prior to Bitcoin, there was no asset that could counterbalance the elasticity of the money supply. Because gold didn't work for that. It came close.
right.
But it's not. You can't move it around fast enough to make it work, and you can't fraction it off fast enough to make it work. Mm. Hey, careful with that cup, man. You're gonna get us banned.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know how smart the AI is, but I drink this every morning.
Yeah, we're gonna get
So
banned.
watching video, but
Those
I
sneaky,
mean,
sneaky AIs.
yeah, didn't have trouble on the last one, and we talked
Yeah,
about being banned and about being on Rumble, and I put it on Rumble. So
yeah.
anyway, I think it's it seems to be kind of very specific keyword, maybe phrase type things that are anti-narrative. So
Yeah.
not sure.
Well, you shall support the state.
Yeah. Well, and then I mean, it just you start going down that track, and there are a lot of people out there espousing dangerous or bullshit things all the time.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, that's not healthy, or it attracts other people that just want to grind and axe and don't know better and get angrier. And okay, but managing that when you start trying to shut it down at all, and you make these categories of, especially in terms of the C word, um, it just connects to a whole bunch of money. So
Yeah,
anyway,
ultimately. I mean, the thing is like if you hear some of this, like I remember when that thing first broke out, like there were people I worked with that would say like, "Oh, it's just the flu. It's just the flu. It's just the flu." And I remember, and I've even had debates with people on Twitter about it. I go, "It's not just the flu. It's worse than the flu. Like it's unmistakably worse than the flu." Oh, that's BS. And how come the flu went away during I mean, just all these nonsense arguments. Thing was, I worked in a prison at the time. Man, you're having a lot of trouble over there, huh?
yeah, I'm trying to get my lighting right,
Yeah, who cares
but
about lighting, dude? No one watches this
okay.
anyway.
Sorry. Audio sucks, video sucks. It is what it is.
Yeah. Well, our audio will probably be better for this one,
Yeah, really.
but my point was is like I watched probably like in person watched probably 30 or 40 people die from COVID. And so every time I hear people go, "Oh, would they die of a car accident?" I go, "No, they died of COVID." Like I sat there watching them choking on their own, stuff, dying. So it's not just the flu. And then I would ask people at the prison, I go, "Oh, okay, so you think it's just a flu, huh? How many people, how long you been here?" And they say, "Oh, I've been here 15 years, 20 years ago." "How many people have you seen die from the flu since you've been here?" "None." "How many people have you seen die from COVID or get really sick or nearly die from COVID?" "Oh, yeah, a ton." So it's very clearly different. Like it's not, there's no comparison there, but they just can't see past it, because they're so
Yeah.
embroiled in the political narrative. I mean, the only thing about this, regardless of where the money leads, it's become a political football, and that's why you can't talk about it anymore. But
Yeah.
it's from there's misinformation on both sides, deep, deep, deep misinformation on both sides. And so trying to parse out the truth of that has now become impossible. And so much so that we get banned for, mentioning a thing that someone else said about a thing. So but it's irresponsibility on all sides that has created this mess. The real thing I'm afraid of now is like something legitimate might come along and become a huge global health problem. And there's going to be half the country that's going to stand there just going, and make the problem worse. So, how, but I mean, you can attribute that to the authorities that handled the last time, is like, because they just bungled that so bad. It was just, you know, endless pools of stupidity floating all around.
Yeah, the the C word now I don't know what it means anymore. People will say, like, I have staff that test positive and they're ready to do whatever they got to do, and I'm like, well, treat it like you're sick. And a friend of mine, um, today, or should I say yesterday, I saw, yesterday evening out here, um, tested positive, and kind of it's got that label attached to it, so everybody's kind of freaked out and isolating and stuff. And I'm like, oh, how are they doing? Fine. What were their symptoms? Some sniffles.
Yeah.
Okay. And they were kind of sick for like a couple days. Yeah. I'm like, what it the weird thing about it is that when it was early too, and people were dying, and it was really hard to know how and when and why that was happening, because like, was it age, was it weight, was it comorbidities, say, and then figuring all that out. And it wasn't always consistent. Like, some people were okay and others were really not, and it was hard to always know, I think.
Well, I think it's become pretty obvious now because, like, if you look at the death rates in the United States versus the rest of the world, like, the United States was leading the charge, but we're also the most unhealthy country on planet Earth by a wide, wide, wide margin. Like, we are just fat, sick, unhealthy people that are eating toxins, industrial waste that are disguised as food. And there's just no, it's a relentless assault on the health of the American populace. So when they get dosed with something like COVID, obviously they're going to get sick and die at far higher rates than everywhere else in the world did, regardless of medical interventions and things like that. But you know
Yeah.
it's more a condemnation on just the American lifestyle and American food and American agriculture, marketing, and stuff like that than it is on whatever interventions came along or didn't come along, or however. I don't know. I mean, the whole thing was just so we're probably treading on dangerous water right now. I
I
don't
know.
even.
I was wondering if this is going to pass muster if we just have ideas about it without, no medical advice here, but sorting out what did we all go through over the years here, just that seemed to be kind of a big deal.
Well, what I can say from my personal experience is what we went through is like a grotesque flood of terrible information flying around at the speed of light, and no real good way to verify any of that information. And so, I mean, on some level, it kind of makes sense why platforms want to parrot the state narrative, because that's the closest thing they can get to veracity. And yet you can tell that the state was compromised from day one, and I think that's come out in congressional testimony. That's it's become pretty obvious now that that was a compromised operation. And
Yeah.
there were voices in science and voices in government that were not parroting the party line, and they got silenced, so they got censored for that. And so it's what it's become, regardless of how it started, and regardless of where it came from, regardless of what happened to people. It's become this means of destroying civil liberties. Like they've just unmistakably they've clamped down on First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and all kinds of stuff. Just got shattered by that whole little experiment. So pretty nasty stuff.
Yeah, last podcast you mentioned Eric Weinstein, who was on an interview talking about some deep state stuff, and really smart guy. He spoke at the Bitcoin conference 2023 in Miami. His brother Brett Weinstein has written. I was trying to remember his name too last week, but he has written extensively about COVID, and because he's a scientist, researcher, on par with his brother in terms of the smarts and communication ability.
Yeah.
And just digging into the origins of it, the science behind genetic research, vaccine, virus research, gain of function stuff, and where it came from. And so he seems pretty convinced that it was a particular change to a particular spot in the DNA, whatever it all is. He used words that I don't fully understand, but I heard part of it. And he's like, that's what they were doing at Wuhan, that specific thing. And so some of the eating weird fresh meat market, bat market stuff, and it was like, what? Okay,
Well,
I mean, I guess that can
that's
happen.
the official narrative right now.
And we have a something that looks like a weird modified virus. But anyway, Brett Weinstein, he mentioned some sort of big get together at the Capitol. Like I think it might have been today, but I was trying to see it, but he's really fed up with control state narrative stuff, and he's talking about kind of like Ron Paul level take America back stuff. So he's very vocal.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of voices out there. Peter Zehan is another one that's sort of pushing that kind of stuff. Like, there's a whole cadre of people that are sort of pushing back on the decline of Western civilization type thing. And, but there's voices on the other side of that have some pretty fair complaints. Like we started out this whole show with, Americans have been getting a free ride around the world for a long time because of our money printer and the global adoption of our currency. So, there's when people think of capitalism, and like when the right thinks of capitalism, they think of free, efficient markets, which is not true. That's just not what we exist in. We live in a socialist capitalist country, 100%. It's government interference in the markets constantly. So there's no laissez-faire capitalism in America. Never has been. Likewise, when the left hears capitalism, they see this Leviathan monstrosity of corporate control of everything and, raping and pillaging of natural resources in poor countries. So rich countries can maintain a exorbitant lifestyle that they don't really deserve or haven't earned. And there's merit to that argument too. Like, it's unmistakable. So the truth of what a society, how a market society should function is somewhere in between those two poles. But you can't have that conversation because everyone's in one camp or the other. They can't see the good stuff from the leftist side can't see the positive externalities. They can't even acknowledge that they are beneficiaries of it. And likewise, the right refuses to acknowledge that, like, hey, this is exploitive in areas and this has been detrimental to millions of people around the world. And just because they're, brown and they don't look like you and you just feel like you have earned some place at this hierarchy doesn't necessarily make it so. And it's certainly anything but a free market economy. So it's the hard part of having adult conversations in a bipolar 8th grade education world. Is you just can't have those conversations with thoughtful people. They're few and far between, and very few care or want to have that discussion or can even give enough ground to let a competing thought into their head. So it sort of becomes just a big frustrating exercise. And then I just go, well, fuck them. I'm just going to go stack some sats and let it all burn, motherfuckers.
Yeah, like that's That's one future possibility, and we can do what we can. Just driving here from the middle of the state to the coast on roads, it made me think about how on one far end of the spectrum, people could say, you know, you didn't build that, government built that for you. You know, how'd you get those roads? You didn't build those, government built that. How'd you, how do you have what you have? Companies who have stuff, you didn't get that, government built that for you, the sidewalk or whatever. And so I was thinking, on one hand, okay, government builds all the roads. And then another opinion on the other far side of the spectrum is, no, government steals your money to pay actually a private company to spend 10 times as much to build that road. But in the middle is the idea that communities of people, wealthy as they may be or whatever, aren't necessarily going to band together and build the kind of road that I drove on to get from middle of the state to the coast, weaving and meandering through hills and woods for miles where nobody lives, and keep it kind of consistent and not have toll booths along the way, or not have guys along the side of the road trying to manage it.
Yeah, manage.
So, so I was just like, yeah, corporations didn't build that road; the government did it. Yeah, freeway internet. Eisenhower's freeway interstate system. Government built that, and I know how. I worked for DOT. 10 years ago for like a year.
Did you?
And I worked, and before that, I worked for state parks for 10 years. And I saw them literally scope out and build a bathroom, literally a modern style, not vault toilet, but running water showers, basic concrete box toilet for $1 million.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, and it took forever. And it was just like, and it was so broken that me and coworkers and our bosses' bosses were all like, how does anything get done and not cost just, oh, we need a toilet over there for the windsurfers. How much is that going to be? Oh, $1 million.
Yeah.
And not really blink an eye, like, no, really, I'm like $1 million. Anyway, that's just my cynical talking. But on the other hand, okay, government does nothing. And if the windsurfers want a toilet, they'll put one together.
Yeah. See how that works.
Well, let's see how that looks.
What they're going to do is they're just going to shit all over the beach. And
yeah.
I mean, there's, I don't, the thing is even these structures that you're talking about, like the road, like, oh, the government built that road, or taxpayers, got extorted to build that road, or whatever, however you look at it. Like, I would say, if you zoom out a little further and go, all right, well, let's just look at the United States of America in general, right? And you look at like the economic trajectory of the United States up until the creation of the Federal Reserve, and then you look at the economic trajectory of the United States after World War II, and you go, well, what did that growth curve look like? And it's sort of like a little trickle, and then a little bump with the Federal Reserve, and then boop, right? And so when all these people post us like, what happened in 1971? I go, well, what happened in 1944? Because that's when the problem started. It's not 1971. And people want to blame it on, well, we got off the gold standard. That's why everything broke. I go, no, we got to be the world global reserve currency in 1945 or 44. That's where it went off the rails, because the incentive there is like, oh, wait, we can just, everyone has to accept our dollars. That's a pretty good deal. So if we just make more of them, we get more shit, right? And everyone can look around the room and go, yeah, that's pretty much how that works. We are the peak, the tippy top of the Cantillon effect, because we're making it. We're the only game in town. Everyone's accepting it. So let's just export everything, or we'll just get rid of all our industry, and we'll just, yeah, you want your labor laws? Great. We'll just go exploit labor laws in Mexico or Vietnam or China or wherever. We'll exploit everywhere around the world because they have to take our dollars. We get to get stuff and then send them depreciated dollars in return. We get to get oil and send them depreciated dollars in return. We get to get rubber and send them depreciated dollars in return. So everyone around the world has been getting fucked by the U.S. since 1944 on. it was a lower rate of fuckery up until 1971. Post 1971, it was just pedal to the metal fuckery. But that's why everything's upside down and broken now. But you can't point to the abandoning of the gold standard as the time when it all went off the rails. It went off the rails the second everyone got together and said, "Hey, here's a great idea. Let's make one currency the global reserve." And that right there is the genesis of all modern issues. The military industrial complex, all the complex pharma bullshit, all the every sort of upside down broken thing you can think of comes from that one little fountainhead, right?
So
But you know,
even
people
before
want
the
to
gold
live in
standard
boomerland,
changed,
right? And just go, hey, well, World War II, post World War II was the greatest time ever in the history of the world. And it's like, man, as long as you were white middle class American, things were pretty great. The rest of the world, not so much.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't even. It's hard to even fathom just post world. You think about post World War II and how that looked for Europe, which was rebuilding hard and slow. But my God, Russia and some other places in the world that it was no cakewalk. It was no party at all.
Yeah.
Um, and so even before the gold standard change, before that, you saw the WTF 1971 thing really began. Before that, with the world reserve currency affirmations post World War II.
Well, that's the genesis of it, right? Like the balance of accounts wouldn't have been so upside down that they had to abandon the gold standard had they not been the global reserve currency, right? If the United States currency had to compete with all the other currencies since 1945 and they were all backed by gold, it would be a very, very, very different world right now. It wouldn't be a unipolar world where everyone is just scrambling to, issue as much debt as they possibly can, because that's the only incentive right now. Post 1971, all they did was just take the brakes off of the problem the U.S. already had, right? Like there was an in principle restriction on how much the U.S. could print. But the reason they abandoned Bretton Woods in 71 or 1970, technically, was the balance of accounts. If everyone came in and said, hey, we'd like to redeem our gold because we don't think you have enough to cover all the stuff that you promised, that would have emptied every single gold bar out of the United States. There would be nothing behind it. So they just rug pulled everybody. They said, well, fuck you, we're keeping the gold. Go fuck yourself.
Yeah,
But the only reason that could happen is because they had had the previous 25 years of inflating the currency faster than they had gold reserves to redeem. That's the same thing that brought down, every fucking currency peg scheme in the history of mankind. There were thousands of free banks running all around the United States of America that were pegging their currencies to fucking sheep, wheat, corn, oil, you name it. They come up and, oh, yeah, you deposit your valuable thing, we'll give you a worthless piece of paper in exchange. And they would give out far more pieces of paper and they had valuable things to exchange for them. And so sooner or later, as a bank run, and the whole system falls apart. The United States had the most valuable thing in the world at the time, gold. They had 80% of the world's gold in her vaults. And then they issued paper, far more paper than they had gold to redeem with. So by 71, it's a bank run. They're going, hey, we can see your balance of accounts. You guys are not even bothering to hide it very well. You have way more paper than you have gold. So we want to redeem our gold just like you promised. And they went,
yeah.
no, not doing that. We're keeping the valuable thing. You can go fuck yourself and take our pieces of paper and stuff them. So,
I was reading a crazy chain of events where France had said, "Hey," and they weren't wanting all their gold back, but they wanted some of
so
it back.
yeah,
And they said, "Hey, we want some back," and they got a little. And then, like I don't know, a year or two later, "Hey, we want some more back," and the U.S. said, "No."
right.
And they're like, "No, seriously, we have an agreement. We want our gold back,
Yeah.
literally."
Come take it,
And they
bitch.
said no. So France sent some kind of a ship to Manhattan and parked it and sat there and like I don't know what diplomacy they were working out with Wall Street and the banks or Federal Reserve or what,
Yeah.
but they sat there at the port of Manhattan, and I want to say it was like a, a battle capable type of a ship that
Yeah.
was like going to try to take some gold, and they sat there and just said, "Put some gold on our ship," and the government just said, no, we are not giving you any gold.
Yeah.
and they left. It was just kind of like, okay, and still we're talking. Um, I don't know when that was, if it was before or after 1971 or not. I think it must have been before, but it was. I want to say it was at least in the 60s.
Yeah.
So anyway, just crazy. You think like that's when in your book you mentioned, people are thinking like World War III or like pending, like we think of wars as we remember them, like World War II or battle lines and armies and bombs and explosions. And there are quiet wars running now in terms of when you think of, hacking or
Cyber attacks and
trade and stuff like that, where it's like, okay, we're not shooting at each other, but it's not diplomatic.
yeah,
And it's kind of Machiavellian, in a sense, kind of like, no, we're going to bend you over here, and then they're going to maybe bend us over there, and oh, they stole that from us. And I mean, almost all the time. What was it? Just yesterday, I think I saw some headline where like Samsung got fined a whole bunch of money for either selling or trading technology to China, or something like that. But
yeah.
anyway, that's just little stuff.
Well, I mean, the thing you're talking about with the French ship and the gold, that traces back to the conversation that we were having earlier about Bitcoin as a reserve asset, right? Like that's the fundamental problem with gold is whoever has it in their vaults, if they've got nukes and big ships and they're separated from everywhere else in the world by oceans and friendly nations to the north and south, once they have the gold, it's real hard to get it back, and especially when there's 100 million lunatics running around with guns in their closet. Like, good luck invading. Good luck getting your gold back, dickheads.
Yeah,
So that's a huge trust issue, right? That the U.S. very clearly just told the whole world to go fuck themselves, and and we've managed to reap the benefits of that for 50 years now. I mean, we've had a pretty sweet deal. Like, I think people are finally going, all right, enough's enough, guys. Like, you're really fucking things up now, and you can thank the Wall Street goons for that particular thing. I mean, if it weren't for the fucking knuckleheads in the '90s, like Greenspan and all those assholes that let this derivatives thing go kicked off, completely unregulated and run by the bankers, like we probably would be still in a pretty relatively thriving economy. But they didn't. They got so fucking greedy and so blind to long term consequences. They just let everything get fucked up. But the point I was making is like if France's reserve asset was Bitcoin, no one can seize that from them. So
yeah,
there's never going to be that issue of like, hey, regardless of who is using a thing as a custodied resource, if they wanted to issue a currency backed by that resource, I think it's a terrible idea. But Bitcoin enables zero trust egalitarian access to their property rights at all times. Gold does not do that, could never do that, has never been able to do that. That's why it's been a tool of plunder and extortion for 5,000 years, because people look at it and go, hey, that's a valuable thing. I'm going to bash you on the head and fucking take it. And if you can't stop me, it's my gold now. You
yeah,
can, there's not, you can't bash enough heads to get all the Bitcoin, right? Like there's just not enough heads to bash. So that's that fundamental rule change. Like when you change one thing, if you say there is a property that exists on Earth that nobody can take from you, the rest of the game that is built on top of that changes fundamentally. Just like we've talked about in the past, if you made it impossible for someone to fake an injury on a soccer field, the entire game of soccer changes overnight. If all of a sudden, every time someone goes, oh, my back, and then some magical hand just lifted them up, said, you're fine, go play. Like the
yeah,
game, all of a sudden, all those delays and all the flags and all the trying to figure out if this guy's faking it or not, and all that shit goes away. The game would never be played the same. But all the strategies, the tactics, everything else that comes forth after that rule change are fundamentally altered forever. Like it changes everything about the game just by fixing one rule.
yeah.
And the rule that
And that,
Bitcoin fixes is such a huge rule. Having property rights that you can't violate is enormous. It's never, ever, ever happened in the history of mankind. And I will plant that flag on that hill and die on that hill until people get a better understanding of what that means. It's not about black market money and buying fucking cocaine on darknet because Big Brother doesn't want you to. It's about like they can't take your property, dude. That's a big fucking deal. Anyway,
yeah, I tweeted a bit about this thing I came up with and then wrote it down in a more clear way in my head, where I was having a conversation with my mom about, my mom bringing up those things. It's like, well, but criminals use Bitcoin. People can just do what they want with it. You could buy bad stuff with it. Bad people do bad stuff with money. And it's like, well, yeah, they do that now, 90% with cash, um, and the dollar. But yes, Bitcoin is money, and criminals will use money. But I said, imagine an alternate reality where all communications we made was done on federal notes. I think I mentioned this last week,
Yeah.
but I was telling my mom how, if all communication had to have a federal stamp on a federal note and had to be sent by federal post, and that was the only way, and that's all we ever knew, then when email came along, it would be like criminals email each other. Anyone can just say anything to anyone, and like for free. And you can't just, we don't just want that, do we? We want anyone talking to anyone about anything, kind of like instant for free.
Right.
And it would be like scary. In fact, the people that made email are like anti-authoritarian, or they don't want it centralized. And it'd be all this concern about email. Email, we're just used to having it, communicating with it. Yeah, criminals can say stuff with email, but it's like freedom of expression in comparison to Bitcoin being like just a freedom of transaction.
Well, there is no freedom to. I mean, I get the analogy. Like I got it, last week as well, and I think you're right. You know what I mean? Like it's, and that criminal thing is like that's just a narrative that anti-Bitcoin people are using to try and promote, you know, censorship of Bitcoin, right? Like that's all that narrative is about. But the point I was making is precisely opposite that. Like it doesn't matter if criminals are using it or not because it's an inviolable property right. Like
It's just
that is
there.
the most important function of Bitcoin is you cannot take someone's property rights from them, right?
Yeah.
And so your ability to transact in a black market versus a white market with Bitcoin doesn't really matter in the long term because the transactional value of being able to just I can make transactions. I can buy my groceries, and no one's going to know that I bought extra fucking Cheetos this week. Like that's not in the grand scheme of what's happening in the world. That is a triviality. It's so meaningless into the conversation about the global economy. If you have a property right that you can't take, like you have no property rights right now. You own no property except for the Bitcoin in your wallet. Everything else is subject to sovereign capture or criminal capture, 100%. The only thing that prevents that are just some of these institutions that are in place that give you in principle, right to retain those things. But if Uncle Sam comes along and says, nope, we're taking your house, we need it, it's our house now, go fuck yourself, they're going to take it. You don't have any recourse. There's nothing you can do. If they decide that's a thing they need, they're going to take it. They can't do that with Bitcoin. And that's why that's such a big deal. Like, so if you're, like, if I hear an argument like that, my thing is like, well, that's not really relevant. You just go, it
Yeah.
doesn't
It's
doesn't matter if
small.
criminals can. It's just like saying, well, sometimes criminals trade trading cards. Like, so fucking what? Like, it doesn't mean trading cards. The most important thing about Bitcoin is that you can't violate a property right, and in a competitive resource capture world, having a property right that can't be stolen it changes everything. Just like I know you probably didn't play Eve Online, but we know Travis was talking about it kind of for a long time.
Mm.
Well, just ask Travis next time you see him. Say, hey, what would the Eve Online game be like if every time you captured property, no one could steal it from you? Like, what would happen in Eve Online? It would be the most boring fucking game ever. It would be a mining game where people would just fly around mine shit and go, hey, I got stuff. It might turn into like this robust economic game where people find all sorts of cool ways to trade and build shit. But it's certainly not going to be a piracy game. It's certainly not going to be a big coalition game. It's not going to be a big fucking warfare game because no one can steal your property.
Yeah.
So if you pick the most valuable commodity in EVE Online and you make it an inviolable property, that game is fundamentally changed forever. And that's
Yeah.
so whether or not these pirate camps can trade illicitly without the coalition knowing because they're using some fucking currency thing is fucking stupid, irrelevant, pointless. It doesn't matter. The it's the rule change that I think people underestimate or underappreciate right now, especially about Bitcoin. I think Jason Lowery is the one that got closest to that
Mm-hmm.
in his understanding of like, oh, what this means to how you access your property. And he views it from, he's a hammer and he's looking at it like a nail. But
Yeah.
I think if you scope out even further from hammers and nails, you look at it and go, oh no, it's a big fucking deal. It changes everything, man.
Yeah, and in your Bitcoin section of the book, you go into this discussion about the rules of soccer and that, and it's almost like not just fouls and fake injuries. It's like it's almost like every rule. Like as people play the game, like you wouldn't have refs trying to catch it and see it and call it.
Right.
If the ball crosses the line, boop, just immediately, nope. Other teams throw in, just
Right.
automatically.
Yeah.
Every rule. Did the ball score? It's just absolutely immediately known to all, and it's not like, wait, but this was it offsides or not, or let's replay it, let's argue about it. It's just like all of that. I think is automatic.
Yeah.
The whole game, every rule is just flowing.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I would love if there was some way to run the experiment, like to if I could convince the coders of Eve Online to change one rule in the game, because you could leave the rest of the rules intact. You wouldn't have to mess with anything. You can still let people attack each other. You can still let people, steal other stuff. You can still let people manipulate things. You can still let all those other rules happen. But if you just said, hey, this one property you can't steal, just change that one thing. See what happens to the gameplay. I guarantee you that game is completely different. Just like,
Yeah, you could put together armies and say, hey, let's battle and see who wins and apply strategy to that.
right. But
But
it would be a pointless exercise because the most valuable resource in the game you couldn't capture by, doesn't matter how big your army is, you can't take it. So it doesn't matter. So, like that would make Eve Online probably unplayable, would be my guess. But there might be other avenues that people would explore because we can't know what that does to an economy. But that's sort of my point with the Bitcoin book and the realignment and the great realignment is like if you change a fundamental property right and if you take it out of sovereign control, what happens to the rest of the competitive resource capture game that we're playing? If the game we are playing is competitively try and capture as much resources as possible, but there's the most valuable resource on the game board cannot be stolen.
mm-hmm.
So you still have the incentive to compete for other resources, other less valuable resources, but the most valuable resource can't be stolen, can't be coerced, can't be captured. So what does your gameplay look like? I think it becomes far more cooperative is my guess, but
Yeah, I see it turning into a lot more like farming and growth. If you want, um, you can play competitive games if you want, but you're voluntarily participating. You're not just, oh, you're farming, and then, oh shit, I'm getting attacked. They're
right.
taking it from me.
Yeah,
That just it's like unless you want to spar,
right.
you're not just getting attacked and having to defend yourself.
Right. Well, I mean, especially if you can sweep all your farming profit into the most valuable scarce resource on the planet or in the game space. So they might come and try and steal your farm. Like the thing is, if you get a farm set up and your first crop is shit, I don't think anyone's going to want to steal your. The only farms people are going to want to steal in a game like that would be profitable farms, right? But if all of your profit has been swept into to a property that can't be stolen, then it kind of doesn't matter if they. I mean, you can spend a lot of time building up your farm, making it super productive, and then someone comes and conks you on the head and steals it anyway, and then they can try and take over the farm, but all of the hard work that you put into it isn't gone with the farm. It's been swept into a property that can't be stolen. So it might even come down to like they just show up and go, "Hey, we're taking over your farm." And you go, "All right, we'll see you later." And you just walk off and start another farm or do something else. But all of your work has been stored in the inviolable property, which is in our case Bitcoin, right? So right now, let's say you've worked 30 years and you saved up and did this and that and the other thing, and instead of buying a house and trucks and cyber trucks and shit like that, you'd swept that all into Bitcoin. the government comes along tomorrow and says, hey, new rules in town, we're going to become the equity nation. All your stuff belongs to us now. You go, oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of sucks. I don't own any of it. I actually just am in debt up to my eyeballs in fiat land, but all my property, all my productive effort has been swept into Bitcoin, which you can't have. They go, okay, well, we're going to take all your fiat stuff. Great. That's all debt. So fuck yourself. There you go. Right. But you still have the fruits of your labor have been stored. So, and they can't take it. And that
Yeah.
that changes the reason why they would want to come steal your stuff to begin with. It changes what their incentives are to what they're trying to stack and how they stack it. It just changes everything, man. It's such a profound shift. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Driving a Tesla where it's like, oh, there's all these benefits and amazing things like on this trip, just the routing and handling of things, and the benefits I feel driving. The driving experience is awesome, and then it's sort of like, yeah, I'm trusting hugely the technology, their software updates, Tesla as a company, say Elon Musk as a person, to to make it a to make it good, be good for it. Because yeah, technically, um, if if there weren't places to charge, if I'm traveling, or if if they don't want a car to drive, technically they could have a car shut down.
Yeah.
It's happened where somebody had a Tesla, like reported stolen, and they can just shut that car down,
Right.
and they know where it is, they know where you are. Um, it's this counterparty risk to driving.
Yeah. Well,
But
I'll tell you what. Like, as you're tootling around, you're driving around 1.5 Bitcoin worth of convenience. So,
try not to think about it later.
yeah.
Coulda, woulda,
Well,
shoulda.
I mean, that 1.5 Bitcoin probably would have done you some good in 10 years from now. So,
Yeah, I,
food for thought.
I think about it. I know. I could be limping along my Suzuki just fine. I
That
know
Suzuki was great.
it
If that were
runs.
my Suzuki, like what I'm doing with my Prius is like when shit breaks, I fix it, right? Like crazy fucking idea. Like, hey, like I just like my key fob, like the little, I don't know how it happened. I just pulled my keys out and like the little red button around the emergency thing was just busted off. I was like, what the fuck is
Mm,
this? Like I was looking in my pocket, it wasn't in there. It was just gone. Like it just
yeah,
fell out. And so for $13, I fixed it, right? Like,
I
but
know.
like I've been chasing around this stupid check engine light for like the last 6 months. And it's things like, oh, just go replace the catalytic converter and go add a new oxygen sensor and just fix things as they break. And then, the car looks and drives pretty good, right? Like I had a heater motor, like the little fan thing. When I first got the car that first winter, like I would go turn on the defroster because everything's frozen and nothing would come out. And I'd like bang on the glove box and all of a sudden the fan would spin the light, right? So for $25, fix that problem. But that Suzuki, like I look at it and I go, man, you put some new bumpers on it and tidy up some stuff. It's like, whew, well, that thing's a monster. Suzuki's run forever, man. So
Oh, it runs, and
yeah,
I've been fixing it and keeping it running for 20 years. Yeah, it is a great car.
yeah.
Um,
But now you got 1.5 Bitcoin on wheels. So
yeah, regrets. uh, I thought, like, maybe down the road I turn it over and sell it and cash out in stack my Bitcoin better. And then it's also hard to let go of. It's like, but I also love it. So it's a fiat brain, but there's nothing like it.
yeah, I don't know, man. I would have taken the 1.5 Bitcoin myself, but what do I know?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I agree with you, really.
Well, how long's your lease on that, or your payment plan on that thing?
7 years, I
Oh
guess.
my God, you're gonna pay like, oh, that's probably like 1.6 or 1.7 Bitcoin.
Yeah, if I wanted to write it out that way and just pay the minimum, I guess.
Oh,
So, but options, I have to, yeah. I
optionality.
mean, I don't like debt at all. I mean,
Well, you clearly do. What are you talking about? You got
well,
a
I mean,
7 year loan on a fucking
I'm
golf
not enjoying it right now. You know,
cart.
for a long time, for years, the only debt that we had in our family was our mortgage.
Yeah,
Um, well, a couple of mortgages, but yeah, just you know, the mortgage thing. So,
yeah,
but you feel like, well, I'm building equity, but
yeah.
like,
You're building.
okay, at least it's land. But then also every year I'll pay property taxes, or there's um, one of the one property I have is in a kind of like a homeowners association, and those dues go up periodically, and
Yeah.
there's community things about it. Hey, we're doing stuff to your roads, or oh, you got to. There's rules about things, and it's like, okay, you know, yeah,
Will
it's
your
not just
Cybertruck
free
fit
and
in your
clear.
garage?
What's that?
Does your Cybertruck fit in your garage?
Yeah, yeah, it's a little tight, but it does fit.
Oh, well, that's good. Because you
Yeah,
never
so I
know.
got
The association might come on and go, hey, we don't want any robot cars in the fucking driveway. So you need to hide that thing when you're at home. If it doesn't fit, you'd have to be out there with a God knows what.
well, and as a physical, I mean, I'll hear horror stories of people that are driving a nice car, like I say, a Tesla, a Cybertruck around, and it's a target. Honestly, it attracts attention. People see it. Trolls throw a brick at the window or something.
Yeah.
It's it has as a tangible physical item that has to be protected. It's prone to attack, I suppose, but I've
Yeah.
never had problems. But
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
it's 7 year loan plus all the extra security measures. And yeah, you probably got 2 Bitcoin worth of golf cart there. Shiny
yeah.
stainless steel golf cart. Hey,
Please,
lost two
nobody.
Bitcoin among friends.
Yeah, don't attack me. Yeah. For 90% of all my driving that I do, it's like to and from home and work, charge at home. It's in the garage. It's on video camera right outside my office at work, and it's like quite manageable and
Yeah.
a nice luxury, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it's rolling risk.
Yeah. Exactly.
If it was Bitcoin, I would not have to worry about it. I'd just be like, yep,
We got some
locked,
Bitcoin.
locked.
I don't know. I kind of want to buy that Suzuki off you. Just fix it up and
Oh,
drive
really?
that
It
part.
it, it runs well. It's definitely it's been used hard for a long time. It runs great. It just runs. It
What year is
leaks.
it?
2002.
Oh yeah. Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'll come. I'll throw a few thousand sats at you and take that Suzuki off your hands, and I'll fix her up, make a Mad Max Suzuki.
It's funny. So I last night, literally, I we're staying at this Airbnb, and they have somebody's logged into HBO here, an account, and I was like, they had all the Mad Max movies on HBO.
Ooh, yeah.
And last night I watched the original Mad Max,
Oh yeah,
1979,
yeah.
and different era of movie. I was reading up on George Miller, and he went to medical school and did residency as a doctor,
Mm,
a medical doctor, as he was getting into filmmaking with a buddy, Byron Kennedy, and who died in like '83, I think.
yeah.
But amazing, smart guy, but made the Mad Max movies, Australian, roots. But I was watching that movie, and it was like it's the descent of society, and they don't really explain what's going on. And back then, you think like the concern was like the gas crisis,
Right,
the petroleum and OPEC and whatever, and then in the background, like something happened, like nuclear war or nuclear fallout or something, sort of catalyzed something there. But it's where patrol cops on the road are trying to keep society from completely falling apart, but it's beyond manageable. It's just
right.
big gangs are running the roads, and there's just no go zones. Like don't go in there because it's just gangs on.
Yeah,
Um, And I
Kind of
was
like
looking
today.
at, yeah, I there's parallels that I see happening, and as often have been in life, you see sort of parallels. Also, back then it was very focused on petroleum, like that. Um, my my younger son saw a little part of it. I didn't have him watch the scary parts, but he was kind of like, "What's going on?" Or why is I was explaining oil and gas and back what was going on in the movie there, and how they were stealing gas and focused on the engines and the cars and the racing and the driving and the roads, and it was all about oil and but definitely finite resource capture and just gang fighting.
Yeah.
But he was like, well, but today we have wind and solar and better batteries and electric cars and stuff. And I was like, yeah, this was a different time. We didn't have the technologies we have today. So it's kind of odd to look at in hindsight now, all this focus on gas, but there are parallels.
Well,
Um,
I mean, wind and solar and batteries, and like zero of that can replace petroleum products. Like it's
yeah,
just that is an absolute fucking pipe dream.
yeah,
Um, so the thing that was occurring, the bigger thing that was floating around beyond the OPEC crisis was a theory that was being bandied about by some, I think it was a Chevron engineer, about peak oil. They said, hey, like American oil production peaked in 72 and has been in steady decline ever since. And his theory was like all these global, like if you look at the number of global finds of light sweet crude, which is like the easiest shit to pump and refine, have been in steady decline since X year, right? And so his theory was like we may have crossed this threshold called peak oil, which means it's going to become exponentially harder to extract petroleum from the ground moving forward. And that was a pretty predominant theory, like in the late 70s, early 80s. And that sort of alludes to what George Miller was talking about in Mad Max. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, they actually spell out in the beginning that there were big wars fought over oil, and they unleashed basically nukes, and that's what brought society down. They said the
yeah,
great powers came together and they fought these horrific campaigns and riots in the streets and people starving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And who was left went and wandered the wastelands that were left over, and that's sort of the post-apocalyptic world of Mad Max 2. Mad Max, the original, was the precursor to that, which was you still had a functioning society that was based on oil, but it was a declining resource. And the thing is, the peak oil thing got all blown up because of like fracking and like improvements in technology and improvements in refining, and like there's heavy crude that comes out of like Argentina or Venezuela. It's a huge producer of heavy crude. They have massive reserves of that, but it's really hard to extract and it's hard to refine. But fracking was another thing where they didn't think they could get anything out of it. They just thought it was trapped, and then people figured out how to get it out. But I think ultimately, whether or not crude proves to be a finite resource or not is still yet to be determined. Because I still believe functionally there is some theoretical upward bound of extractable petroleum that's financially feasible. And if we actually hit that, then things are fucked. Back in the day, like in the 90s, the Saudis were propping up pressure in their wells with seawater. The problem with propping up a well with seawater, like one of their largest reserves was being propped up with seawater. Like they pump seawater in underneath the oil to increase wellhead pressure. Problem is, if the seawater reaches the wellhead, then it's only seawater from there on out. It never pumps oil again. So
yeah,
you can effectively fuck yourself by trying to increase your production and then end up isolating yourself from the rest of your reserves. And those basins are light sweet crude, so that's all like pretty readily refinable stuff. But I don't know, man. Like what we really need in the world is to get away from energy excess. because like all this, like people driving around in their own individual cars on fucking toxic shit that's paved all around the fucking country, that's not a sustainable future. You know, like there are all sorts of sustainable things coming along until gasoline and cars came along, and that fucked up a lot of stuff right there too. So when people want to point to the source of problems, you can go, well, you could say what the fuck happened in 71, but then you can go and say, well, what the fuck happened in 45, and then, well, what the fuck happened in 1913, and then what the fuck happened in 1898, and then what the fuck happened in 1870. I mean, you can just keep tracing it back and back and back, and you can get all the way back to what the fuck happened in Rome, you know, during the time of Herodotus, and it's, you know, like there's no epoch, there's no one event. It's just like a culmination of all this shit put together is how we ended up where we're at, right? But I
Well,
did you watch any of those other Mad Max films?
I've seen them all, and so my favorite, I I guess my favorite for a long time was the Road Warrior. You know, the second one was just, it's just so classic. The first one really kind of set up a world, but it was a lot of, you know, personal fighting, like what made Max mad, and it's a sad story. But you just get a glimpse in this world, and it's just sort of like police fighting gangs, and a trooper goes rogue and just is going to end it, and as everything is falling apart, so he becomes the Road Warrior. Number two is like, okay, now we're in this world, and how does that look? And it just blows open this whole concept of life, post apocalyptic life revolving around gas. Thunderdome, yeah, okay, whatever, kind of an adventure tale for kids. But the Furiosa ones they've made more recently,
Yeah,
2015, he made Furiosa, which actually
I thought that was
critical
Fury Road.
acclaim. What's that?
I thought Fury Road was 2015.
Oh
Fury,
yeah, Fury Road. That was 2015. Was Fury Road? That's where they introduced Furiosa,
yeah,
and very well done. I mean, there's some social politics in there, which I thought it was just fine. But talk about even the first movie, just the quality of the cuts, the action shots, the camera movements. It's incredible what
yeah.
they did,
Oh yeah,
and with all the visual effects and stuff they can do now. So like Fury Road, my God, it's beautiful.
yeah,
Uh, the I mean, it's over the top. You got the guy with the electric guitar shooting flames and all that. It's like, okay, Burning Man stuff,
yeah,
but it's cool.
yeah,
And the action and the effects and just the thought process that goes into creating an action scene that goes on and on and on as they're racing along on a road and getting attacked and all this stuff. It's You can't not watch it.
all right.
Um, and then I thought the more recent one that came out this year, Furiosa, it's her backstory. It basically it fits in between Thunderdome and Fury Road,
Right.
and it's a good story. It's really,
Yeah.
you know, I find a lot of movies kind of over the top in the volume of their action, or you're going to have a battle, and instead of having kind of a normal number of people, you got to have 100 times that number of people, and it's kind of over the top.
Yeah.
But the characters and the situations are really interesting, and it's brutal. You can't help but, you know, not to give away spoilers, but the brutality of what made Furiosa, and losing her hand and all that. It's you can just sort of, well, so like I was listening to um, the Martyr Made podcast with God. What is that guy's name? I want to say Jason Carroll or something. Anyway, he has a podcast called The Anti-Humans, or the Anti-Humans, and it goes into the brutal stuff going on a lot in Russia and Eastern Europe and stuff during
Communism.
well, yeah, during after the World War II and the communist stuff going on, and it is sick.
Yeah.
The gulags and the prison camps and the torture and the brainwashing, like you will be a good Soviet.
Right.
Um, marching into Hungary and Poland and rounding people up who may not be wanting to be in the party or just allegedly not, or, show me the man and I'll show you the crime.
Yeah.
Oh, it's sick. It's so
Yeah.
sick. And so you think about a world where, Dan Carlin gets into this with his hardcore history, where you go back into history and there is the most unfathomably sick, brutal stuff that has happened in our history, and completely unfamiliar to anyone's ability to understand it today. Um, you would think, but then some of this stuff, you're talking back in the 50s and 60s, some of it in Russia.
Yeah.
So
China,
crazy.
Great Revolution, all
And
that stuff.
China.
Yeah. Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam. I mean, it's
Oh
all
yeah.
Pol Pot and Cambodia, but yeah.
Oh, huge. Yeah.
Well,
So
when people assault Western institutions, they put all that stuff back on the table, right? And that, Western institutions are designed to keep that kind of shit out, right?
yeah,
So, but Western institutions also have their own history of genocide and fucking horrible shit. So it's hard to say who's on balance. I mean, it's easy for those of us sitting here going, "Oh, look at all the horrible shit they did." And meanwhile, like, we just fucking nuked Iraq for no fucking reason, and like, we nuked fucking Vietnam for no fucking reason, and we nuked fucking the entirety of Central and South America for no reason, and we nuked the Native Americans for no fucking reason. So it's just kind of like, it's not like we can sit here and go, "Look how much better we are." It's like, well, yeah, as long as you don't count all the brown people you killed along the way, then yeah, we're great. We're the best fucking thing ever. We flattened Europe, by the way, so we fucking nuked. We quite literally nuked Japan. Like, we dropped nuclear bombs on civilian populations, and we were part and parcel of flattening fucking civilian populations in Europe. So we are the global genocide leader by a long stretch. It just depends on which slice of history you want to grab. But certainly, the way the communists did it was brutal to the average Joe without state action, right? Like, state on state action. But yeah, but I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to go to El Salvador today and say, "Hey, what do you think of all the great stuff the United States did for you guys?" And they'd just be like, "How about you go fuck yourself?" Like, the Latin American debt crisis, you guys created a civil war here. You guys fucking deposed a legitimate government. You've installed fucking dictators all around South America and Central America, and then you fucking, you've imposed economic hardships, and I mean, hundreds of millions of people have suffered under the U.S. boot, and
yeah,
it's an uncomfortable reality, but it's, I live in this pretty awesome house thanks to a lot of that stuff. So I don't know.
yeah. The CIA's involvement in Central and South America was a whole bunch of crazy fuckery, and then um, so then it puts in perspective, when I complain today about things I see, or I hear from others, complaints about things in the world today, and it's also, at least as an America as an American, it's such a soft time.
Mm,
We can sit back and pontificate about these things comfortably
yeah.
without literally worrying day to day about shit. Like who was it talking about? Like in living in Argentina, where if you're a professional making money and you have a business or whatever, half your job is running the business and keeping that running, and the other half is getting your money safe and secured in a way where you can't get it stolen from you.
Right.
Um, and everybody's just scraping to scrambling to somehow have an asset they can hold that's safe. And
Yeah.
so then Bitcoin comes and can fix all of this all around, and then with just enough time navigating a great realignment that a Mad Max scenario cannot happen.
I sure hope so. Nobody wants it, even those people that think they do. I guarantee it. There is no shortage of people that think, yeah, they got their little survivalist fantasies and whatnot. I go, you're dead within a month or two, dude. Like, it's inevitably some fat fuck that's got a CPAP at night and has diabetes medication. And you're like, yeah, well, we need the fucking revolution to happen. Like, you're the first one to die, dude. Like, you have zero ability to self-sustain just because you can't live without modern conveniences because you're such a fat fucking unhealthy piece of shit. So like, but it's always those guys that are, they got their big truck and their fucking racks of guns. And I'm like, how many of those guns do you think you can carry after the mobs just overwhelm your fucking house? Like one. So you'd be better off with a fucking pistol and being in good physical condition and not subject to, death by disease and starvation and shit like that. Because right now, they're so vulnerable physically from their health standpoint. You just go, man, you got zero chance of surviving the Great Reset if it comes down. Like you're the first one in the fucking FEMA camp, dude, by a mile. Like I can safely and easily navigate 50 miles over rough terrain and do just fine because I'm in good physical condition. Most of my counterparts that I look around, especially here and at work and stuff like that, and a lot of them are very like, oh yeah, I got my, pseudo survivalist kind of things. I'm like, you guys are all fucking dead. Like, there's zero chance because they can barely walk up the stairs. I'm like, you're not surviving combat. You're not surviving even a small skirmish because you're going to be winded and they're going to overwhelm you. I had a buddy at the prison who was going around during COVID. He was going around buying ammo. Like every time there was a drop at Bimart, he would go and get there. He had like a little circuit that he was doing because he wanted to stack up ammo. And I'm like, what are you stacking ammo for, dude? And he's like, well, I've got like 10,000 rounds or something. I'm like, guess how much ammo they burn? Like one squad in Iraq, what's the average ammo burn for one skirmish engagement? About 10,000 rounds. So for one 15-minute engagement, they dump 10,000 rounds of ammo, just spraying it all over the place. So you got enough for one engagement if you can reload that fast. And there's 4 more of you that are helping you, or 6 more of you that are helping you. So yeah, good luck with that. What happens after your 10,000 rounds? And he was some kind of fat kid anyway. So I'm just like, dude, how about this? Go put a backpack with a 10-pound weight on it, go run around the block and see how you feel. And I'm like, I watch him at the fucking training. Like he couldn't even jog to the end of the parking lot and back and then do the shooting test. Like he's out there wheezing. I'm like, yeah, you're combat ready, dude. You're ready to go and fight the fucking revolution and, die for the glorious freedoms of America. Like you are a young person that is pre-diabetic and can't run across a parking lot. Combat requires more than that. It requires a lot of hustling. It's a highly physical activity that is very loosely translated to shooting at things. So, for all the ANCAPers out there and all the people that think, hey, we need the great glorious revolution and we're going to take it all back by violence and force. Every single person that's ever fought a war thought they were going to go out and win that day. And, 15 years later, they're still fighting and scrapping. Those of you that survive that long will eventually harden yourselves to a point where you can survive in that environment. And then you're going to be traumatized for the rest of your life and things are never going to be the same again. So yay, good fucking journey.
Yeah, that level of survival, you pretty much have to have a lifestyle closer to the earth, willing to move. You can't hole up and just sit and protect something all alone.
Zero chance.
Then 10,000 rounds of ammo is heavy. So, one, you're sort of like you're going to just have a supply of water, food, whatever tools, and what ammo. Are you carrying a cart around? And where are you going?
Yeah.
And you protect yourself once or twice with what you got, but boy, when you're compromised, you're moving. You're traveling, you're moving, you're living off different places where you're at, and you're kind of off the earth, closer to the earth.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like being a member of a motorcycle gang, it's that's a workout.
Yeah.
Not only mechanically inclined and capable and willing to do hard stuff, but you're moving, you're sweating, you're wearing the same clothes.
Yeah.
It's a workout. So,
well, the beauty of being in a motorcycle gang, for instance, is like you have safety in numbers right out of the gate. You're all already a coherent organization. And most of those motorcycle gangs are big, fat, unhealthy people anyway, like body by ramen types, body by beer. But the broad point being, though, is they're accustomed to engaging in interpersonal combat, and they have group loyalty, and they have a means of mobility. And they're used to doing things like camping out on the side of the road, riding their bike across the country and shit like that, right? So as a survivalist, quote unquote, like I would give far more weight to the Hells Angels than I would to any fucking prepper living on a farm somewhere. Like, they're just, Like one is a sort of realistic preparation for shitty times, and the other one is just like a fucking fantasy. Like, I got all my canned goods. Yeah, well, as soon as the Hell's Angels roll in and they just take a bunch of pot shots or just burn your fucking house down, like they don't even know how to get close to you. They just start launching Molotov cocktails at you until something catches fire, and then you're fucked. Like, game over, you lose.
Yeah. You've
So,
got your setup, and then just be prepared to like lose it all for a really dumb random reason or like surprise.
well, here's a better idea: is just don't be a fucking target. You know, like don't own a Cybertruck. Maybe I don't know.
That's a
But
target.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, just like outward ostentatious displays of wealth. Hey, I got a great big 4x4 on the front. Well, you're probably going to be a fucking target. You know, if someone comes rolling through and they want to rifle through your cabinets and they look and see, well, you've got a can of beans. You go, yeah. I mean, you can almost let them in. They go, hey, man, we're here to steal all your shit. And you go, well, I don't have anything. I mean, you're welcome to look, dude. But if you're skin and bones, you're wearing rags, and you're just kind of sitting there scraping up potatoes, and people are just going to leave you alone. They don't give a shit. But same thing happens in prison, man. If you come into prison and all the thugs in prison are going to be asking their buddies in jail, hey, how many people were putting money on this guy's books? They go, oh yeah, he was getting money all the time. He had all the great fucking commissary. He was always getting ramen and candy bars and all sorts of shit. The second that guy walks on the unit, they go, hey, there's my target for extortion. When they call their buddies in jail and they go, what was this guy like? Oh, he came in covered in fleas and fucking bugs. He's a fucking criddler, man. He was just like some meth head that was living on the street and got wrapped up in some fucking robbery. Oh, that guy gets zero attention. He just walks in, they go, whatever. Right? But if you're like Joe middle class guy just trying to make prison a little more comfortable, well, you're going to be fucked for the rest of your stay there. So, but I think what holds true in prison rules is going to hold true in some sort of post-apocalyptic ANCAP fantasy world. If you got a bunch of shit that looks like you have a bunch of shit, you've got problems. But if you live in a shack and by all outward appearances, you're fucking dirt poor, but you happen to have a store of goods underground and you can kind of use that for subsistence, but you get in line for bread anyway, then you can kind of eke it out and you can kind of fly under the radar. But really handy devices to have in a situation like that are, say, like a bullet resistant, stab resistant vest and a very small concealable handgun, because you might just get robbed at some point where you're kind of fucked anyway, and it'd be nice to shoot your way out of that. But if you think you're going to go marching across the country with your fucking full tactical gear and your fucking 14 rifles slung around your fucking body and driving a 4x4 truck, you're done, dude. Like, you are going to get ambushed, you are going to get overwhelmed, and you are going to lose. So, I mean, they're painting great big targets on their forehead, on their back. They may as well put a great big red circle on the ground and say, right here is good shit. Come fuck with me,
Yeah. When the
I don't want to be
motorcycle
the guy
gang,
living in a shack.
yeah, when the gang rolls in, um, you're not fending off a whole lot for very long.
No.
Um, and when it comes to societal collapse or class warfare, it becomes very apparent who has stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And even if you think, well, I'm middle class, I don't have much. Well, it's enough.
Yeah,
So
it's a lot more than poor people have, and poor people are the ones that are going to benefit the most from having some left-leaning fucking communist bullshit coming in. Like, if you look at the Cultural Revolution, there's a reason why those people are so cruel and vicious to each other. It's because they were marginalized people for most of their life. And suddenly they are thrust into a role where they get to have power. And you see it with prison officers, you see it with cops, you see it with all kinds of people who are kind of pussies in life and the kind of little wimps. All of a sudden they got a badge and some authority and a gun, and they got some people backing them up all the time. All of a sudden they start getting this big fucking attitude, this ego, and they start marshaling around. They're badge heavy is what we call them, but they're fucking dicks is what they really are. But they're dicks because they're low power, low status people in real life, right? And so once they get a taste of it, they become monsters. It's real easy to turn poor, marginalized people into monsters because they feel like they've been victimized their whole life, and they feel like they've been marginalized, and they've been taking the kicks and the fucking shitty treatment from their, people that have more money than they do. And that's how those people end up monsters. And if you get your little communist Harris presidency, those are the people. Like, just look at all the people that are in the, DEI movement and all those people that are out marching. These are not like high status, high profile, high power people. These are all universally extraordinarily low status bullied people. And so there's a reason why they are embracing and running with an identity that gives them some sort of power and authority in the world, because they haven't had any their whole life. but they don't know how to wield it either. So when they get into those positions of power, they very quickly become monsters, and you can just see it as they're sitting there screaming in your face and spitting on you and calling you fucking, murderer and Nazi and all this shit. They have zero compunctions about that, but they're the same people that were dropping dimes and saying, "Hey, this person's not wearing a mask," or "Hey, this person's going outside their house when they shouldn't be." Like, they're the snitches, they're the rats, they are the vermin of society. It's just, I shouldn't call them vermin because it's not. They're just low status, low power, low agency people. But you put them all in a group, then they become a real nasty mob. And
Put together a struggle session.
yeah, and
Um,
they thrive on that shit. They just love watching people go through that shit,
yeah,
even
love
when
a
they
good
recognize
struggle.
they might be a victim of it pretty soon. But in the brief time that they have that power, they love it. They revel in it. They're it's a criminal mindset ultimately, because all criminals are low power, low status people.
Yeah, I've been to job related trainings that felt like little mini struggle sessions at times, and it was just like
Oh, they're not
this.
many. They're 100% struggle sessions, dude. They're. I mean, you can couch it in like, well, they're being polite, but yeah, there's zero. That's precisely what you're being subjected to, and that's the problem, is we all sort of willingly go along with it, and then we've been willingly going along with it since the PC revolution started happening in the '80s. You got
I
to be
feel like
politically correct.
yeah, and I feel like some of that social stuff is just sort of losing traction steadily. Where like we saw BlackRock back away from ESG and other companies backing away from DEI. And I mean, thinking of motorcycles, Harley Davidson, they were corporate, um, like Budweiser, Harley Davidson, John Deere, some of these other companies. It was like, okay, this is the current word. We're going to be relevant and what not be targeted in some way. And so they go after the ESG or DEI stuff. And I see them backing off that now. They're like, well, that isn't working,
Yeah.
or it's not fad now as much.
Well, it's still very much at the forefront of it. It's just they're losing political capital because, more and more moderates are abandoning the ideology, or at least not tolerating as much as they did. But yeah, it's ultimately toxic, and it's, but the thing is, if you allow the other side their free reign, they're pretty toxic people too. There's a reason why these people are marginalized, is because the people have historically had the money and had, the authority and the power and things like that. I've been very quick to just shit on their heads, lock them up, throw them in prison, shit on them, just treat them poorly, right? And so what we're encroaching towards is like mob versus mob, and it just depends on which mob you want to align yourself with. But me personally, I don't want to be part of the mob. When you listen
Yeah.
to fools, the mob rules, as Black Sabbath and Ronnie James Dio would say. And um, I think it's well past time we stop listening to fools, but there's no shortage of them right now, and social media allows the fools a lot of voice and reach. So
Yeah. And so when I look at that kind of stuff, for me, I mean, I have my opinions, but navigating it, I don't like to get political or, well, what side are you on? It's kind of like navigating the middle path, kind of a Buddhism concept. You mentioned it briefly in your book about Bitcoin sort of threading a middle path through all this. It makes me think of you were on a podcast. Well, it only posted recently, but the Bitcoin Way.
yeah, those
Um,
guys are awesome, by the way. I mean, they are just, it's a great company. Anybody watching this, you should really check them out. Like, they're not paying me to say this. Like, I've met them in person. They're really, really awesome people. And they're really great about doing Bitcoin security education. And they also have like this kind of cool Plan B residency thing that I'm actually going to go explore myself. I think that's kind of a neat thing that they're doing. But yeah, just real down to earth, genuine people. The other Michael Jordan, his name's Michael Jordan, but he calls himself the other Michael Jordan. It was the host, and really, really smart guy, a really, really thoughtful thinker. And yeah, like, anyway, that's just my little plug for some people I think are really pretty neat human beings, and I'm pretty impressed with what they're doing. So that's my.
yeah, I haven't been able to listen to it yet. I want to listen to it as soon as I can. We were traveling and doing family stuff, but how did that go?
It went really well. I actually, when the podcast ended, I was like, we kind of did it early, and it was during a week day, like I took the day off from work so I could do the podcast. And it was right before I went up to Seattle to visit my sister and stuff like that. And so it was early, and I wasn't like, I didn't have enough time to decompress from work. Like I was still sort of in work brain, which is not a very good Bitcoin brain. But so I felt like I was kind of rambling, and I was sort of like all over the place, and I didn't really know if I was being coherent or not, and kind of tired and just sort of out of it. But then I watched it and I was like, oh, actually, it came out a lot better than I thought. So I was pleased with that. Like, I didn't want to be a bad guest for this guy, especially Rick over at the Bitcoin Way is the guy I met in Prague, and I had a real nice long chat with him. I mean, I met everyone else at Bitcoin Way booth, but Rick was the one I got to. I mean, he was super impressive. Just he was the guy that lost the Bitcoin in El Salvador. Like he lost like 10 Bitcoin or something like that. I mean, just an
Yeah.
absolute hammerfuck. And he was just such a genuine and like honest guy, and zero like victim status or anything. He was just there going like, hey, learn from me. You can take this shit for granted. It's easy to take for granted, and it's easy to lose. So think about this, be thoughtful, and we can help you do that. And I thought it was such a great message. And he was just a really nice guy. I mean, he was really cool and a very thoughtful person, and just a fun guy to talk to for a while. So but yeah, that was. I think the show came out okay. Like I wanted to at least have a good showing for that, because he was the guy that recommended me for the show, and I was like, oh God, man, this guy was like, yeah, you should really talk to this guy, and I'm just here like, like. But I think it came out okay.
Cool.
You'll have to let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to it. And with is your book? Would you say it's done? You finished up
Oh, yeah,
the references?
well, that was kind of why I wanted you to read that last part. Like, I don't know if it wrapped up very well or not, but
I think it's very good. And the hardest thing about all of this, and it's what people often want to know, is, well, tell me the future, soothsayer.
yeah,
What's going to happen? And what's so hard is that, it is so hard and unknowable. And to even say anything about anything, well, then you're wrong.
right, yeah,
Or,
you're just subject to attack. Yeah,
and typically those types of folks, they make lots of open-ended enough predictions that some of them stick, and then by God, Nostradamus was actually right.
yeah,
And the thing is, you're not throwing spaghetti at the. I've read books, like not like yours, but along, like there's a big new thing, and they're on it, and they're talking about this and that and the other, and then they wrap it up with, here's what I think all could happen.
right,
And it goes down a laundry list of all this future prediction stuff.
right.
And I look back on some of those books 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Some of them, it's comedic. It's like, because it's easy. It's easy to be right in direction, but totally off in strength.
Details, yeah,
Or like, well, okay, you weren't wrong, but to read it on paper, like, here's what could happen. It's like, oh my God. And it's not like Mad Max.
right,
It's complicated realignment.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think what some people may think when they're like, the great realignment, what does that mean? What is it going to be? Like, tell me, futurist.
Yeah.
Give us the juicy stuff,
Yeah.
and you'll be wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think the juiciest thing I can give is like the rule change. I mean, that's I could just sum that whole book up by like Bitcoin, the rule change, right? And then it's like, what does the rule change mean? Well, it changes a property right. Like it makes the most scarce and valuable property on planet Earth, inviolable property right. That's what Bitcoin does. Well, what does that do? Changes everything. How does it change everything? Well, it changes everything the same way, like if you weren't allowed to commit a foul in football, or the same way if you weren't allowed to cheat on something else. And if you're talking competitive resource capture, if there's just no way to steal the most valuable scarce asset on planet Earth, if you can't steal it, then what do you have to do to acquire it? It's a very different world, right? So, but
Yeah.
To sum that up, like, which is why I gave all the pretext on power, money, and greed, is to give people an understanding, or hopefully broaden their understanding of like what it means when you're talking about, changing economics or fixing something or changing an economic structure. It's like it's a big deal, right? And it breaks a lot of things that you might not want to break, like the way Dean Weinstein, was it Dean?
There's Eric Weinstein.
Eric Weinstein, what he said, I love the term. I wish I had thought of it myself, but he said, "Hey, these are load bearing walls, you know, and you can knock them down if you want, but you're likely to bring the roof down on your head." And when people say things like, "We just need to, you know, dismantle the Federal Reserve," I go, "That's a load bearing wall, dude. Like you can't just fucking go bloop, delete, and then expect everything to work. So you're gonna get fucked if you try something like that." But it's the
Yeah,
same thing if you just go, "Hey, we just need to get rid of Social Security. We just need to ban the Department of Education." I go, "Those are load bearing walls, man. Like they're not, and they are holding up a very fragile structure. So careful what you wish for." I mean, yeah, maybe after the roof collapses, we'll have a better structure that'll emerge from it, but you still have to deal with the collapse first. And the idea is you want to avoid catastrophic collapse. You want to avoid violence. You want to avoid warfare. You want to avoid civil war. You want to avoid conflict, because conflict at scale spins and spirals rapidly. And once you open the door to violence, only God knows how far it swings. So you cannot, every person that's ever engaged in a fist fight has always thought, well, I'm just going to settle this once and for all. And next thing you know, they're on murder charges because the guy conked his head on the fucking concrete or something like that. You don't know where it ends. And, you know, when they kicked off World War I, they didn't realize how fucking shitty that was going to get. And they certainly didn't understand that there was going to be a nuclear bomb dropped on civilians by the end of World War II. Like nobody saw that coming, but that sure as shit fucking happened. So, yeah, I mean, the amount of destruction you can unleash through violence is extraordinary, and people really, really grossly underestimate it because they haven't had to deal with it. They haven't dealt with it firsthand. There's a reason Europeans have all these weird institutions and all these sort of democratic norms in place, because they've been through it. We haven't. We got to participate in it. We got to show up later and fucking start knocking down walls. But we didn't have to rebuild our country as a result of it, right? And you saw what happened when just 2 buildings fell down in the United States. The whole fucking country went into fucking shithead mode. So what happens when all the cities are flattened? Like it just doesn't end up the way people think it's going to go. So
yeah.
we need to avoid those outcomes, because if you can hold as true an ideal that we should preserve human life, which I very much adhere to. I think the preservation of human life is a fundamental biological trait for the survival of our species. And to violate that willy-nilly, I think, is just fucking catastrophically stupid. So
I think it's easy on both sides to say, you know, we need a great reset. Things are so broken. Let's tear it down and start again clean. And that could be on either end. It's sort of like ANCAP or communism.
right.
And so I'm anti collapse and calamity. And so even as I don't like the system and I see money printing and interest rate stuff and kicking the can down the road and add another zero to these giant numbers, it's kind of like I'm okay with it because it provides more space for
Solutions.
Bitcoin to
Yeah.
heal.
Yes, I agree with you 100%.
It's like having a fever, and it's like if you're sick enough, I'm okay with riding out a long fever if your immune system is steadily working at it and
Right.
you're going to survive it. And then when you've survived it and you got those antibodies, you're done.
Yeah.
Someone else has that sickness and you're not going to get it again.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of it, and that's a great point. Is like once that antibody works its magic, like we're immune to the fiat cancer forever after that.
Yeah.
But the people that want to knock it all down and start over again is the equivalent of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like I like what you said a lot. Like we want to give the cure enough time to work, because. And one of the neat things Michael Jordan said was, it's the poison is the dose, right? So you got to get the dose right. And right now we're dosing appropriately, I think. And it's not going as quickly as we want, or maybe some people, I think it's continuing apace. I see, if it weren't for Bitcoin, I would be a very hopeless person right now.
Yeah, me too. You mentioned that in your book too, where personal transformations,
Yeah.
I mean, there's one reason that ego death capital is called that,
Right.
because if when you experience at some levels a kind of like ego death, oh, I mean, I've grappled with that myself. What Bitcoin's done for me is it's like self work. It's not like, oh, my finances, my numbers, my whatever.
Right.
It grinds on me personally. What I have to reevaluate, like what I'm doing as a person to be good and right.
Yeah.
And it works on you, and it's not hard. And you question yourself, and you cringe at yourself, and you're like, oh. And it's that hard work that, just as like seeing in the system. I don't like seeing stuff or seeing the infection, seeing a fever, but as it works on you, I've been healing personally.
Right.
The system is healing slowly, and it's healing slow but steadily fine,
Right.
and it's working its way in ways where you can't track. It's like you could say it's intractable. Like little cracks get in there, they're growing. The roots are growing and holding a stronger foundation.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
that it's like an antibody response. What happens is there's an initial response that sort of makes the system degrade slightly, right? And then the antibodies ramp up, ramp up, ramp up, ramp up, and then until it spreads through the whole system in mass. And then the healing occurs, and then the body feels better. Like that's gradually, then suddenly, quite
yeah,
literally, right? And I think that's why, when I was talking to Michael Jordan, I said, "Hey, man, people are pretty doom and gloomy right now, and I don't blame them for being doom and gloomy. Like if I let myself wallow in it, I can get pretty doom and gloomy pretty fast. And yet, there's also that part of me that goes that gradually, then suddenly, like it's irrelevant of the number, it's irrelevant of the financial stuff for most of us. The bigger thing I think is when it permeates into the organs of the state that you just go, oh, hey, look, the antidote is in, and now it is spread out throughout the system. And once it gets system wide spread, it's it is a body, right? The global economy is a body, and it's an interconnected, networked body, just like any other corporeal being. This one is just an artificial creation. So there is already artificial intelligence existing on Earth. There's already an artificial organ or organism living on Earth. It's called the global political economy. And, Satoshi Nakamoto came and just went, hey, just like whoever invented penicillin just came along and said, hey, here's a little shot. Check out what this does. And, it's healing the system now. So but when that those antibodies spread, because they're going to spread faster and faster and faster, just like antibodies do, they multiply and they spread quicker.
yeah,
And they get to the most infected parts first and work on those the hardest, then that's the thing that's going to heal our system, and that's the thing that's going to get us transformed away from the fiat cancer into like a Bitcoin future, right? And I
yeah,
think the fiat cancer eventually recedes and then declines into remission, and then maybe that's the 30 or 40-year journey that you can go, hey, we have a new way to implement money now, but it's based on 30 or 40 years of development or 50 years of development. It's not based on like, here's an idea that I have that might work, I hope it goes, and they just try and supplant something, right?
yeah. And I hope you go from shaking and shivering and sweating and aching and hurting one night, and you sleep hard, and then we wake up in the morning and suddenly you just like, yeah, you're ragged, you're tired, you're worn out, you want to shower, but you're like,
Yeah, not
I'm
bad.
I'm all better.
Yeah,
I'm all better.
right. I think
My
that's what's going to
God.
happen. I swear to God, I will cling to this probably until the day I die, but I have a very sneaking suspicion, like when Samson Mao's $1 million God candle shows up finally, which is only like what he points out is like 12x from here or something like that. It's not much. Uh, I think that's going to be the day the fever breaks and everyone's going to wake up and go, oh, huh, you know what? Things like I remember a couple years ago, everyone was just really fucking pissy about stuff, but it's kind of better. Like I don't see as many homeless people. Houses are getting more affordable. Food's getting more affordable. The food's actually better. Like I feel like I can go out again and can kind of go and enjoy life. And these countries in South Africa and or the African continent, South America, they're all sort of getting better, and their quality of life is improving. Like everyone's just getting better. And when people are happy, healthy, and fed, extraordinary. We're an extraordinary species. It's when they're starving and scared and under stress that we are the nastiest, most vile species to ever inhabit the planet. I mean, we're just extraordinarily dangerous animals when we're under stress. We're extraordinarily beautiful animals when we are not. And so I think Bitcoin removes that stress factor. So we'll see.
Yeah.
See what people think of my book when it comes out. I'm anticipating widely ignored, but we'll see.
Well, I mean, podcast by podcast, when you've got a book and you've been on a few, it's like you've got that portfolio where you can, be on the rounds with some of it. And just by having the book and then also working other things as you are, I mean, yeah, that's our hope, is to escape our fiat salt mine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
Just put on some wings and flap. All right,
yeah.
man.
Cool. Well, thanks for
That's
joining
almost 2
remotely.
hours of jibber jabber today.
Yeah, we made it work, and we'll catch it again in a week here.
All right, cool, man.